great to be here. This is a venue that I've been in so many times. We actually run our education program here, so I'm very familiar with this stage. No nerves. I've been up here before quite a few times. What I want to talk to you about before lunch is some of the processes, practices, and approaches that Amazon uses to maintain our pace of innovation. We're an organization that's well known for doing new things, and not all of those things work out, but we do continuously try to experiment with the art of the possible, obviously powered and enabled by the technology that we build. I'm going to get to that at the end of the session. Before I do that, I just wanted to talk briefly about how Amazon Web Services got started, where the AWS idea had its inception. This was back before 2006 when we launched our first public service, which was Amazon S3. That was in April 2006 that we created and launched that service for customer consumption. But a few years before that, we were looking at challenges that we were facing in our own software development practices, and we realized that it would be more efficient and quicker for our builders if we equipped them with a set of standardized technology components that they could reuse when they were trying to solve problems and build new systems and build new products. And it was this desire to make life easier for our own innovators that led to the inception of the idea behind AWS, industrializing the infrastructure that we use and making it available via a set of APIs that our own internal consumers would be able to take advantage of the next time they wanted to build a new product or service for a customer. Now, in doing that, we also had certain other fundamental characteristics in mind, which you can see here, but we also had customers in mind. And what we started doing here was socializing this idea with a few organizations that we thought might have interest in a similar set of solutions, other organizations that we thought could benefit from the same kind of services, the programmatically controlled, large-scale infrastructure with a set of standardized components that the developers, initially in startups, would also be able to use to build brand new software-enabled products, to build brand new digital experiences for their customers. When we launched those first two services back in 2006, S3 and EC2, following in the August of that year in beta, we did see early adoption from this type of organization, from these startups that were interested in building brand new technology-enabled products. And that's still the case today. If you're starting a new business, I've asked this question of thousands of people, by the way, over the course of the last year, tens of thousands of people, actually, and only 2 people have put their hand up to say that they think it's a good idea to invest startup capital in buying equipment and putting that equipment into data centers. Nobody does that. It's just not a good use of resources, and it doesn't provide the level of agility that organizations that really have only one competitive advantage, which is actually that agility, doesn't provide what they need from that perspective. Now, that's the picture of usage of AWS going back 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. Around 2010, 2011, we started to see something else happen, and that was that more established enterprises got interested in this trend. They got interested in the same practices. They got interested in the same kind of service models. They got interested actually in rediscovering their ability to compete with innovation and rediscovering their ability to create their own digital products, their own digital service experiences for their customers in a way which matched the model and methodologies that some of these startups were using. And we started to see early usage of AWS in established enterprises around this time. Today, they do something else with the cloud, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So, millions of active customers using AWS every month, coming from those two categories, startup and enterprise, but also public sector, nonprofits, ISVs, and other organizations that want to take advantage of the same kind of services. And we believe this. We think that if you're using or building technology today, or using or building products that require technology today, the vast, vast majority of users will default to using the cloud. Hardly anyone. Well, would anyone in this room use their own money if they were starting a brand new business? Would you use your own money to buy servers and buy infrastructure? Would you even buy software outright? Or would everything you use be selected from a set of services that were the best fit? Who would invest their capital in fixed resources? So nobody will do that. It's just not how we think about delivering technology today. There's a couple of big patterns in this trend. The first is startups. They're still using the cloud very actively, both in product businesses and increasingly in platform businesses. So building on primitives still happens when the product that you're creating is actually a platform for others to build on. This is the category that Stripe and Twilio and to some extent Slack and Intercom are in as well. So providing platforms built on top of the cloud is a very common approach here in startups. In the enterprise, of course, those digital transformation initiatives, those new digital products, those new mobile experiences, those new API-based delivery models, all of those new things have been built in the cloud. But increasingly what we see here is large-scale modernization of existing infrastructure as well. So customers are shutting down data centers at scale. They are moving very large existing application portfolios into AWS. A great example would be something like News Corporation around the world. They're shutting down over 30 of their 40 global data centers, and they're moving a portfolio of over 3,000 different applications to AWS as they do that. And the drive for them is returning these real estate assets to their owners, so exiting leases, or in some cases selling or reusing that property. And there's a big business case associated with that transformation activity. It touches all parts of News Corporation. It's not just restricted to the parts of their systems that are digital and face their customers for digital product delivery. The third big trend is the breadth of the platform is a really important selection aspect for customers. So we always say this at Amazon Web Services, offload undifferentiated heavy lifting. Focus your efforts on things that genuinely provide unique value for your customers and therefore, by implication, provide unique value for your organization as well. And defocus on the problems that have already been solved, on the problems that have already been solved with solutions that have been turned into services that you consume rather than technology that you have to design, procure, plan, build, and operate for its lifetime. And feature breadth and service breadth is a really important selection criteria for customers. So diving into one mutual New Relic and AWS customer for a second, just to talk about how this works in practice. Probably there's a few Trainline people in the room. There was certainly some at dinner last night when I was sitting with Mark and the rest of the customers that were with us last evening. Trainline, does anyone use this service? Who uses it more than once a week? I'll keep my hand up. I use it all the time. I travel to London. I live in Yorkshire. You can probably tell I've got just a little tinge of that left in my accent. I live in Yorkshire. Sometimes, okay? Sometimes I eliminate it. Travel by train all the time. York to London. I'm on that train twice a week, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, sometimes more, okay? And every time I do that, I'm paying a premium. I'm paying 50 pence to 70% more, 70 pence more than I would be if I walked up to a ticket machine at the station and bought that ticket. So why do I do that? What is the premium, the value that's delivered to me in return for that premium that I pay on top of the ticket? Well, discussing this last night, actually, the value is in convenience. It's in ease of engaging with the service. I can get out of my car at York Station. By the time I've walked the 20 meters from my car to the platform, get my phone out of my pocket, select a train, buy a ticket, put the journey in my diary and tag why I'm traveling, expense the cost of the ticket with our integration that they have with Concur, so I immediately have my expense report claimed, download my digital ticket, activate it so I don't have any paper to pick up or carry or lose, and then stand at the right place on the platform and be informed about where there's a gap on the train by a service that Trainline have called BusyBot. So I can actually position myself in the right place on the platform to get a seat. Okay? I mean, that is the ultimate inconvenience. It's a really good digital product experience. And I'd say AWS is responsible for that. Trainline are responsible for that with their own product-centered thinking and their own innovation. But AWS plays a role in creating the enablement environment to allow Trainline to move at the velocity that they want to, break the monolithic application they had up before into a collection of services that are independently deployed and independently maintained and actually have completely independent life cycles from one another. And doing that with really high velocity with 150 releases a week, improving reliability and driving cost out of their business as well. In fact, the cost reduction here comes from capital spend elimination, so they're no longer spending capital, avoiding obsolescence on the hardware that they used to run. Now, if they want the latest generation of hardware, they're just stopping and starting instances or taking advantage of those next generation technologies from AWS the next time they do one of their regular 150 times a week deployments. So they have a really immediate model for getting access to the technology that enables them to serve customers like me in a way which really does earn the small premium that we're all prepared to spend on these train tickets. By the way, they are the 6th largest retailer in the UK and their revenues are about £2.7 billion a year, which is phenomenal when you consider they only have one product in one category, which is transportation. Pretty amazing business, really. So enabled by the cloud. Now, what I really wanted to talk about today is how Amazon thinks, how we maintain our own pace of innovation. It's something that customers, often they're not, I find it quite surprising that customers are often not that well informed about how Amazon operates, despite most customers saying, in fact, one of the earlier speakers mentioned this, we do some special things. We're able to have some big impact on customers, deliver services that customers find really compelling, deliver good long-term outcomes for our stakeholders, our employees, our other stakeholders. And we have a specific methodology, a specific set of processes, a specific way of thinking that we use to enable all that. And it sometimes surprises me that more people don't know about it. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about it. It's quite interesting, okay? First thing we've got at Amazon is a set of, we call them leadership principles. Other companies might call them values, or values is how they used to be expressed when I worked in telecoms. When I worked in telecoms, they were written on a piece of paper, stuck on the wall of a meeting room, and that was that. They were rarely referred to, and they really had very little impact on how the business was run and how we thought, okay? You couldn't get further away from that within Amazon. We use these leadership principles every day. We use them to hire people. We use them to promote talent. We use them to take decisions. We use them all the time. You hear our teams talking about them with one another. You know, we think somebody didn't fully exploit or take advantage of an opportunity that was in front of them. We might say something to that individual like, you didn't really have enough think big there, you know, you should have thought bigger. You should have had a bigger view on what was potentially achievable with that project or initiative you were working on. That would be our think big leadership principle that we're trying to motivate and encourage that team member to apply. Okay, we've got 14 of them. They're listed. They're not actually in order, except the first and the last one. Okay, so the first one is always customer obsession, and the last one is always deliver results. Okay, and we think that by doing the things in the middle, the other 12, we'll naturally get to delivering results, actually, in most cases. Okay, now customer obsession is tightly linked to this statement, which is why I started with talking about leadership principles before I start talking about some of the working practices that we use. So we try to put the customer not at the heart of everything we do, at the beginning of everything that we do. So before we do anything, we want to make sure that we've validated our hypotheses, validated our idea with customers. You'll find that within AWS, well over 95% of the new services and feature enhancements that we create come directly from customer feedback, from customers saying to us, really like it if you could make it easier for me to manage my cryptographic materials. Okay. Or, you know, we'd really like to use AWS, but you're not in Canada. Can you create a region that's in Canada, please, so that we can use AWS for our regulated workloads where we need Canadian data sovereignty? And this is the kind of conversation that we have with customers, and this leads us to create new services. So it's based directly on customer feedback. We'd never emulate a competitor. We'd never do something because a competitor had done it before. We might have a customer say to us, you know, we like this service that's being delivered over here. Can you make it part of the platform, please? But we always validate. You know, we never emulate. It's really important. Okay? And this plays a huge role in creating new services beyond inception. When we're creating new services, we start with two artifacts, a press release and a frequently asked questions document. The press release will describe in very simple language what it is we're launching. Okay, and that is what we want to get to at the end of the creation process for this new service or idea we've got. Going back to my example about crypto, we might have written a press release for AWS KMS, which is our key management service, which said something like, Amazon Web Services Key Management Service is a service that makes it simple for customers to create, manage, and audit access to encryption keys within the AWS cloud. You can use these encryption keys to encrypt your data at rest, meet regulatory and compliance objectives, and keep your data secure. Simple enough, short enough, and that's the kind of language that we're striving for when we create these press releases. Then we create the FAQ. The FAQ is the next level of detail down. How does AWS KMS integrate with other AWS services? Question. Answer. You can use KMS in conjunction with EBS, the Elastic Block Store, to encrypt your data at rest. Each EBS volume will have a uniquely generated key, which can then be encrypted with a wrapper key, which is stored in KMS with full auditing capabilities. So we're answering the next level of detail down that enables us to start building the technical features that are required to make that service a reality. That's how we work. Those two things go to a very senior level within Amazon Web Services for sign-off, approval as a kickoff gate before we start to do any design work, write any code, or engage with customers to refine the idea. Okay, so we always start with the customer's perspective on the service before we do any of the heavy lifting associated with making it a reality. So it's a customer-led development process, a customer-directed development process. At the end of that process, by the way, once we've created that service, we can't actually announce it and make it publicly available until we've got a customer that will stand with us on the launch day and say that they are using the service at launch. So that's our final gate, closing the loop, if you like, between the inception and actually making the final service available for consumption by customers within the AWS cloud. So we have the customer at the front of everything that we do. Second thing is on experimentation, and this is a super interesting area. I was at an event yesterday close to Utrecht in the Netherlands with a VP speaker from Amazon Web Services, from Amazon.com actually, Paul Misner. He's the VP Global Innovation for Amazon. And he was talking a lot about the scientific method and how it can be applied in business. There'll be a video of that talk available on YouTube right now. So if you're interested in learning more about parallels between scientific research and the way in which AWS and Amazon more broadly operates, I'd advise you to check out Paul's talk from yesterday and take a look at that. I'll put it on my Twitter a little bit later on, and you'll see my Twitter address at the end. You can find it there if you're interested. We've not really got time to go into that today because that was a 30, 40-minute talk in its own right. But one important takeaway is that this is something that Jeff Bezos said last year, actually, in his letter to shareholders. That's the CEO and founder of Amazon. He said, wants to make Amazon the best place in the world to fail. He said, we failed big with the Fire Phone, where, by the way, we had to write down hundreds of millions of dollars worth of inventory because it was an unsuccessful product. But he said, don't worry, we're working on much bigger failures than that right now. Which I think is a very interesting mindset, okay? And of course, one of the reasons that we wanted to equip our builders with AWS is so we could do, our software developers and our engineers with AWS, is so we could do a lot more experiments and do them at a lot lower cost. How likely are you to do a quick experiment if it takes you months to get the infrastructure that you need to run the code that facilitates the experiment? You're not likely to do many experiments of that type. It's just too painful, right? But if you lower the barriers to experimentation and make access to resources a lot simpler, what happens? People want to experiment more. And do you know what happens when you experiment more? You have more successful experiments. Okay, so there's a direct correlation between those two things. But you also have failures, and that's the other side of using the cloud, isn't it? What happens if that experiment fails, if that product's not successful? Well, the resources that you use, they're fluid. They can be liquid. They can be reused by other builders in the organization or by other customers, returned to the pool, returned to the platform, and immediately made available. Your charging will cease. You can immediately make those resources available for the next experiment that you want to do. And maybe that one will be successful. So equipping builders with the right tools is a really important part of enabling this kind of culture. Okay, so don't be afraid of experimentation. Definitely don't be afraid of failure. Failure actually is what results in business disruption. Fear of failure is what results in business disruption. You're too scared to push the envelope and see what's next and what's after what's next. And before you know it, a competitor, a new entrant, is already delivering what's after what's next, and you're irrelevant. Okay? So if you want to survive in a big company, to some extent, you have to embrace this mindset. You can't sit there and refuse to change, because everything else will change around you. Okay? It's a really important point to remember. Organization. It's a very famous structure that we have, the two-pizza team. We call them two-pizza teams because our optimal team size can be fed by 2 large pizzas, so American pizzas. So you're thinking about 8, 10, 12, 14 people, depending on how big the people are and how big the pizzas are, I guess. Why don't we set a limit on team size? Well, maybe we've got an idea and all of a sudden we realize we need a really, we're going to introduce a machine learning or deep learning neural network component into this service that we hadn't previously considered. We want to bring in our brilliant machine learning scientists to help us optimize the product with some smarts, but we've got our team size and we can't go bigger than 12. Well, that would be pretty stupid, wouldn't it, and pretty silly. So we want flexibility, but we also want small-scale teams with ownership. Werner Vogels, our CTO in 2004, said something that at the time was quite revolutionary in technology and software. He said, you build it, you run it. Probably we all aspire to have that mindset today, but when he came out with that, I worked in telecoms back then, we had 3 different teams in our operating model: plan, build, and operate. So this was radical thinking if you're in telecoms. It was radical thinking if you're in technology at the time with your service management thinking, your ITIL mindset, which I think Chris Astley might have already destroyed this morning on this stage with a bit of luck. Yeah? Okay, good. So this ownership mentality, this simple communication, this rapid iteration, this way of working, it's facilitated by small teams that can communicate without a large overhead. Okay, keeping the teams together, physically together, is also something that we strive to do. Not always possible, but we strive to do that. It really helps us iterate more quickly, engender that culture of ownership. And there are milestones in the creation of these teams as well. So for example, when a new service owner gets their team room, which is the physical location where their team are going to be based, they'll raise a flag and say, look at me, I'm starting to get moving with this initiative now, I've got space for my crew, and then over time it'll grow out and you'll get more people sitting in there, and you get a real sense of momentum in the teams by doing that. Importantly, we don't overload new initiatives onto existing teams. If we have a new initiative, we'll create a new team for that initiative. Having gone through that PR FAQ process to validate and justify the investment, make sure that it's something that customers need, we'll then staff a team, okay, and then we'll create a new pool of resources to work on that, delivering that new service or that initiative. So we don't overload existing teams with more and more responsibility. That, again, is a recipe for a higher ratio of failures, in my view. Okay, so small teams. Already talked a little bit about this. So experimentation and automation are tightly linked. You want to be able to access the resources that you need for your experiments, the resources that you need for your ideas in a way which is very immediate, very predictable, and very reliable. Automation is also a really important attribute of operating the cloud in a cost-efficient way. What's the point of having resources that you pay for by the hour if it takes hours or days to configure them? So we want to be building automated pipelines here that allow us to establish environments very quickly, use them for their intended purpose. That might be a CI or CD pipeline, or it might be servicing a customer request in a period of elevated demand, or it might be analyzing a set of data for an AI or machine learning model that we wish to build, and then we can discard those resources, remove that cost from our bill, and the next time we want to perform the operation, we can start again with fresh resources. Latest technology potentially, lower cost, higher performance, but still in that known state because we built that automation framework that enables us to get the resources as we want them very rapidly and very accurately. Okay. Also extremely helpful in high reliability scenarios where I've had a failure in an availability zone, or I've had a machine that has failed for whatever reason. If I have a strong automation framework and I can immediately replace that system with an exact replica, my tolerance to failure is dramatically improved. I can be much more resilient, and I can build systems that have the capability to recover autonomously in the event of things going wrong. So that's another place where automation is really important. And automation is also important in the context of security. I don't want to have configuration drift. I want to have my systems, my environments in a known state which meets compliance obligations that I might have, might meet regulatory standards, might include activities such as deleting or cleansing data in accordance with retention policies that exist. If I have automation in the environment as a key tenet, then those problems can be solved as well, and they can be solved in a way which is super efficient. When we talk about security being job zero, just to relate this back to creating new services and launching new things, you probably noticed that when we launch new services at AWS, they're quite often missing features that you would consider a priority. And you're looking at the service thinking, I'd like to use it, but you don't have X or Y feature. We launched a service quite recently in the image recognition space called Amazon Recognition, which is a pre-trained deep learning neural network that you can submit images to and receive image metadata back. And it didn't launch with a feature, which personally I don't like very much, and I'll explain why in a second. To do with my hair. I'll explain in a second, okay? It didn't launch with age detection for people, and it was a requested feature, okay? And a few weeks later, we came out with age detection, and yesterday the system told me I was 68. I got white hair. I don't think you do too well either, Mark, I'm afraid. Yeah, probably. So, and that's an example of wanting to get the core tenet of the system solid before we start adding additional features. So, and the core tenets for any service that we launch are threefold: security, reliability or durability, and scalability of the service. Okay, and in layering on more functions into a service like that, we may compromise scalability, performance scalability as a result of the additional workload that we're pushing onto the system. And that's why we might hold back a feature like that when creating a new service. Don't want to disappoint customers by degrading service quality, and having the service out there in use with a reduced feature set allows us to use instrumentation to gather data about usage patterns, observe the state of the system in use, the state of the service in use, and ensure that we meet the high expectations of customers in terms of service quality as well. So we're very careful to make sure that everything we build has those 3 core attributes engineered into it. And if you've ever built a software product, you'll know that retrofitting things like security to existing products, well, you might as well not bother. It's so hard to do it. Okay? Might start again rather than try to do that. So I'm going to close up by talking about freedom of access. So this has been a really important learning for us. And this doesn't mean no control. Sometimes enterprises will say, what, you want me to let everybody have AWS accounts and run up bills and do things? No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is try to create an environment with the right guardrails, with the right governance, okay? And try to think about moving your mindset away from those being retroactive activities that are done after the fact towards those being activities that are part of establishing the control framework within which you work. Okay, so for us, this is best articulated by talking about a tool that we have internally, which facilitates single sign-on using Amazon identities into the AWS console. Okay, so I can log into our identity provider within the business, visit a site, authenticate myself with 2-factor. At that point, any AWS account that I've got that's previously been linked to the system, to the gateway system, can then be accessed immediately with 1 click without needing to represent any credentials. Okay, so it's very simple for people in AWS and the broader Amazon organization to create AWS accounts using this process. There's no governance required to create an account. You just visit the portal, create the account, the costs will go to your cost center, and you get this very simple sign-on process. Okay? So why do people do it? How do we incent them to engage with the AWS environment through that channel in order to allow us to establish controls? So we incent it, obviously, by making it simple and by picking up the costs of the account if they create it that way. But the quid pro quo is, at account creation, we establish auditing rules within the account, auditing roles within the account, and then we're able to perform automatic information security and compliance governance on all resources. And everybody that's wired into this system will have their accounts periodically checked against the security baseline. So that's the quid pro quo. For the convenience and simplicity of the single sign-on login, we establish the auditing rules. And you get emails like the one I got last week informing me that one of my team members had a slight security misconfiguration on one of his accounts. Actually, an account that he'd taken over from another team member that had chosen to leave the business. And we were able to close that hole immediately because the automated auditing picked that up and notified us about it. So we have this model, freedom of access, but the trade-off for freedom of access is wire into our auditing and compliance framework so that we have the right control framework established around the resources that our teams use. Okay, I just want you to think about that. How much more experimentation could you do? How much more innovation could you do? And how much more secure might you be if you built similar systems and implemented similar practices in your own organizations as well? Thank you. Mark.